Distinguished delegates, I would like to call this meeting to order. Dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to a formal virtual session of the third meeting of the Subsidiary Body on Implementation. Today is the second day of our third block of plenaries. Colleagues, I would like to remind you that we are on a very tight schedule and that our time together is limited. I propose that we proceed as follows during today's plenary session. We will continue with agenda item 4 and finalize our consideration for approval of CRP1 on assessment and review of effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. After that, we will address the following agenda items, progressing as far as possible today and continuing on tomorrow on Sunday. Agenda item 7. We will review CRP3 on communication, CRP4 on knowledge management and the clearinghouse mechanism, and CRP6 on the evaluation of a strategic framework for capacity building and development to support the effective implementation of Nagoya Protocol with a view to approving these documents. We will also hear a report back from the co-chairs of the contact group on agenda item 7. As mentioned at yesterday's plenary session, I will propose the deferred consideration of CRP13 on capacity development, technical and scientific cooperation, and the clearinghouse mechanism until our resumed session. Agenda item 5 will review CRP9 on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, other matters related to post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and CRP14 on the implementation plan and capacity building action plan for the Cartagena Protocol. Agenda item 12, specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments in the context of Article 4, Paragraph 4 of Nagoya Protocol. And finally, agenda item 13, Global Multilateral Benefit Sharing Mechanism, Article 10 of Nagoya Protocol. So we'll see how far we can get today. Yesterday, I said I would consult with the Bureau on how to proceed with agenda item 8. This morning, I took a proposal for handing agenda item 8 to the Bureau, and the members of the Bureau will now consult with the regions, and I will come back tomorrow to the plenary with a decision. So I would now like to proceed with the approval of the CRPs. Before I begin, I'd like to remind you that if technical issues arise, please use the green question mark in the bottom right corner on meeting homepage to request technical assistance. Since we are now familiar with the online platform, I have also requested the Secretariat to maximize our time, refrain from making statements on organizational work and logistics today. However, I would like to remind you to speak slowly, as our dedicated set of interpreters have to translate in the other 5 languages. So I think we all have to try to help them so they can hear clearly what we say. I thank you in advance for your consideration. So let's go on and go back to the CRP we started to work on yesterday. So distinguished delegates, I now invite you to turn to our consideration with CRP1 on the assessment and review of the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety under agenda item 4. When we concluded yesterday, we had already completed section D. So today we should start with section E, para 23. I would now like to continue to go through this document paragraph by paragraph. And as this is an item under the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, I will give the floor to parties to the protocol. So colleagues, let us now continue with CRP 1. And we continue with section E, liability and redress, and paragraph 23. And that paragraph starts with notes with regret. Any comments on this, Brazil? You had the floor.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Well, regarding paragraph 23, Brazil would like to suggest deleting the expression with regret at the beginning. As we understand that given the supplementary nature of the Kuala Lumpur Protocol, well, parties remain sovereign to decide whether they wish to ratify in accordance with their national circumstances and priorities. So we'd like to suggest deleting the expression with regret in the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Is the proposal by Brazil to delete with regret acceptable? Any comments? I see no request for the floor, so the para will then read, notes will limit the number of parties to the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety that had ratified the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on liability and redress. Portugal, on behalf of EU and its member states, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to see you also today. Well, we would suggest to not delete with regret. So we would like to suggest to keep that wording because we believe it's an important topic. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal, on behalf of EU and its member states. Well, we have one party, Switzerland. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would also like to keep the original wording, so keeping the word regret, because we think it's important that we also encourage parties to ratify this additional protocol. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Switzerland. So, well, maybe Brazil, could you accept to keep the text, not delete it with regret? And first I give the floor to New Zealand. You also have comment on it. New Zealand, please.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand would support Brazil's intervention on this. It is a voluntary issue, and that's something we get quite acceptable.
Thank you, New Zealand. Ecuador, and then Norway.
Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. In line with what has just been said by the distinguished delegate from Brazil, we agree with the deletion of this reference because of its voluntary nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Ecuador. Norway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Norway would also like to keep the wording as is. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Norway. Well, we have some parties who want to delete the text and some parties would like to keep it. I will then suggest we keep the text with regret in square brackets. So you will read the notes with regret in square brackets, with limited number, etc. I hope that can be acceptable. Any objections to that? I see none. So para 23 with that bracket is approved. Let's now move on to paragraph 24. Let's start with request with Secretary. And then I see request of floor from Malaysia and then Colombia. Malaysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We propose to add capacity building to the text in the second line after the word awareness raising to add and capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you, Malaysia. Colombia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In this paragraph, we have two suggestions.
Colombia, I think I cannot hear you. Colombia, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
No?
Now I can hear you. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you.
I just heard that you were supposed to suggest something, but I didn't hear anything else. So please repeat.
In the first line, we would like to delete the reference to subject to ability of resources. We prefer to delete this part. And also, in the second line after undertake, we would like to delete awareness raising in order to have more a broader scope of activities in the way to ratification efforts of Nagoya, Kuala Lumpur.
Thank you, Colombia. I wasn't totally clear. So your second suggestion would be to delete awareness raising. That's correct?
Yes, Madam.
And then, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. To delete subject availability of resources. And we also have a request to delete awareness raising and a suggestion to add and capacity building. Portugal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the UN member states, and we would like to request the addition of square brackets in the new text. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. Morocco, you have the floor.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente. Bonjour à tout le monde.
Good day, Madam Chair. Good day, everyone. Is it possible that the delegate want a deletion? Could I ask the Secretary to read the full proposal made by this delegate, because it kept cutting out during his intervention?
Yes, of course. Can I ask the Secretariat to just read out the para and clearly indicate what suggestions have been made? Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair. So the paragraph with the deletions suggested by Colombia would read: requests the Executive Secretary to undertake activities to support ratification efforts, and then the sentence would continue as it is.
Thank you, Secretariat. And I also heard the comment made by EU and its member state that they would like to have all the new proposals in square brackets. Portugal, would you like to come back, followed by UK?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify that also the deletion proposed by Colombia, we will prefer to keep the original text. So if the deletion is going to be kept, we prefer to include in square brackets. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, EU. UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good to see you this morning. A similar position to the EU. We we thought that the original text of this paragraph was very good, and we would like to have kept it as it was. We would need to keep subject to the availability of resources within the text. This will be a budgetary decision that needs to be discussed amongst the parties. And so we think that that's an important point that we do keep within here. We also recognise that requests to the Executive Secretariat are many, and so we need to make sure that we're not overwhelming our Secretariat with additional tasks, which is why we quite liked the specificity included in here of awareness raising. And I think also supporting capacity building, but not undertaking all of it. I think we need to make sure we're not overwhelming the Secretariat with work. So our suggestions for now, Madam Chair, would be if we could keep all of the suggestions in square brackets, and we may come back to them at a further time. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, okay. Well, colleagues, I don't really... I would have hoped that we maybe could clear up and not add so many new brackets, but I think since we don't have much time, I would then suggest that we keep the suggestions both to delete subject available resources and the awareness raising, and the suggestion to add capacity building in square brackets. So all suggestions would be in square brackets. With those clarification, would the para with square brackets be acceptable? I see no objections. It's so approved. And I move on to para 25. Let's start with welcome to progress by the parties to the supplementary protocol. Is this para agreeable? Any objections? I see no objections. It's so approved. We now move on to next section, section F. Handling, transport, packaging, and identification. And we start with para 26. Let's start with welcomes effect at almost all parties. And is this para agreeable? Any objections? I see none. Is so approved. Let's move on to para 27. Notes that most parties reported. And then continue like that. Is this para agreeable? I see no objection. Is so approved. Let's now move on to next section. Section G, Socioeconomic considerations. And I start with para 28. Let's start with note that about half of parties have specific approaches, etc. And I see first I have Portugal on behalf of EU and its member states, and then Brazil. Portugal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In this paragraph, the EU and member states have some suggestions to propose. So the first one is to substitute encourages by invites. And the other suggestion is to add following accordance, is to add with Article 26 of the protocol. So if needed, I can read the para with our suggestions, if you prefer.
Yes, could you just read it out with your additions? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. So notes that about half of parties have specific approaches or requirements that facilitate how socioeconomic considerations should be taken into account in decision making with regard to living modified organisms, and invites parties that have not yet done so to develop such approaches or requirements as appropriate and in accordance with Article 26 of the protocol and with their circumstances and capacities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal on behalf of EU. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, once again. Brazil would like to suggest deleting the second part of the paragraph, starting with encourages parties. have not yet done so to develop such approach or requirements. As we understand, the obligations under Article 26 have a voluntary nature. So we would like to suggest deleting the second part of the paragraph, starting with encourages. Is that clear?
Yes, I think it's clear. So you will delete, you will stop with regarding to living modified organism in the third line, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And the rest you would like to delete.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I give the floor to Norway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to keep that part of the text. Reason being that exactly the reason why it's a voluntary thing that we use the wording encourages. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Norway. So we do have in this para some different views. If I start, we have Brazil would like to delete the text from and encourages, and it has been also raised by now we want to keep that text. And then they also have a suggestion that to replace encourage with invites, and that also add in the end with Article 26 of a protocol. Since we do have different views on this, I suggest that we put all those suggestions in brackets, so we can come back on this. I hope that is agreeable. With those brackets, could the para be approved? See no objections, is so approved. I now move on to para 29. That starts with notes that more information, etc. And I do have Norway. You have the floor.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. For this para, regarding socioeconomic considerations, we do not wish to soften the wording for encouraging parties to take this into account. So Norway therefore suggests not to include the phrase "those parties that wish to do so," and we would like to keep the text in line with how it was in the draft to the informal session. So we suggest changing the text as follows, starting from socioeconomic considerations in the second line. To support parties to take socioeconomic considerations into account, and then add in accordance with Article 26, paragraph 1 of the protocol. Should I repeat?
Yes, please, Norway, if you repeat your proposal in dictation speed.
Yes, of course. So, starting from socioeconomic considerations in the middle of the paragraph, to support parties to take socioeconomic considerations into account, in accordance with Article 26, paragraph 1 of the protocol. Was that okay?
Yes, it's okay. And I understood that you then would like to delete to support those parties that wish, or?
Yes. So to exchange the text I just said with, instead of keeping those parties that wish to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Portugal, on behalf of EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we were going to do the same suggestion that Norway regarding the additional text in the end of the sentence. So we are very much in support of that additional text. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal. So we do have a text suggestion supported by EU. So could the Secretariat read out the amended para?
The paragraph would read, notes that more information on methodologies and approaches should be gathered and shared, and encourages parties to exchange research and information on socioeconomic considerations to support those parties to take socioeconomic considerations into account in accordance with Article 26, paragraph 1 of the protocol. Sorry, can I repeat? To exchange research and information on socio-economic considerations to support parties to take socio-economic considerations into account in accordance with Article 26, paragraph 1 of the protocol.
Thank you, Secretariat. Is the para acceptable with those additions? Colombia and then Brazil. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In this paragraph, we prefer to keep in brackets. And if we recall the Article 26, we also would like to see the Article 20 that is regarding about information sharing, because the sense of the second party of the paragraph 29 is not also is not only socioeconomic consideration, as well is referring to the exchange, research, and information. So, if we would like to see the inclusion of paragraph 26, we would like also see the Article 20 here of the protocol. If no, square brackets. Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Colombia. So you would like to add in accordance with Article 26 and Article 20? Is that correct? Could you maybe clarify?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Brazil?
Thank you.
Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, once again. Well, Brazil would suggest keeping the original text, as we understand that the expression that wish to do so provides a more balanced approach to the Article 26 and the voluntary nature of obligations under paragraph 1. So we would rather keep the original text and keep the additional text proposed by Norway and the EU in brackets. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you. I just wanted to also support the proposal made by Brazil, and also just to indicate that paragraph 2 of Article 26 is also applicable in this discussion. So I would want to see at least in the spirit of compromise to delete reference to paragraph 1 and leave in accordance to Article 26. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Portugal, on behalf of EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we would like to suggest to add square brackets in the text proposed by Colombia. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Portugal. Yes, we do have now. I would then suggest that all the different text amendments would be put in square brackets as suggested, and if with those square brackets, could the para be approved? Any objections? I see none. It's so approved. Let's move on to para 30. Also encourages parties. And Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and sorry for taking the floor again. In the second line, after women, we would like prefer see youth and delete cultures. I repeat, the inclusion of youth, women and youth, and the deletion of cultures. And the paragraph continues as it is. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. I give the floor to Mexico. You have the floor.
Buenos días. Muchas gracias, señora Presidente.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. On paragraph 30, we would like to see after the word women deletion of the word cultures, and instead we'd like to have the expression the relation between nature and culture. For Mexico, this is important to protect biodiversity, especially in mega diverse countries. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. Portugal, on behalf of EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we would like to support the suggestion made by Colombia concerning the substitution of cultures by youth. But we would like to substitute to consider to promote the involvement. And additionally, we would like to suggest square brackets in the new proposal made by Mexico. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal. So we do have a suggestion by EU to say also encourage the party to promote the involvement of instead of consider. And then it continues indigenous people, local communities, women. And then we have a suggestion to replace culture with youth. And we do have a suggestion to add relation between nature and culture. And they have also comments that want to put all those in square brackets. I have not seen any opposition of the proposal from the EU to, in the beginning, to have promote the involvement of instead of consider acceptable. If I start with that amendment. I see no objection to have to replace consider with promote the involvement of. So we can replace consider with that. And then the other suggestions I suggest we put in square brackets in accordance with what have been proposed. With those amendments and square brackets, can the para be approved? I see no objections, is so approved. Let's now move on to the next section, section H, transit, contained use, unintentional transboundary movements and emergency measures. And we start with para 31. Welcomes the fact that is that para acceptable to parties? And I see no objections. Is so approved. I move on to para 32. Also welcomes the fact that nearly 3/4 of parties. Acceptable to parties? I see no objections. Is so approved. And then go on to para 33. Encourage parties that have not yet done so to adopt the necessary measures. And I see Portugal followed by Colombia. Portugal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, once again for giving me the floor. Well, in this para, we suggest to delete the following part of the sentence. To regulate contained use of living modified organisms and living modified organisms in transit. So this part we suggest to be deleted. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal. So your suggestion is to delete the text to regulate contained use of living modified organisms and living modified organisms in transit. Thank you. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the end of the second line, we would like to see the following reference, as well as for unintentional transboundary movements, comma. I will repeat, as well as for unintentional transboundary movements. And continue with the paragraph.
Thank you, Colombia. Switzerland, you had the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we would like to keep the original wording, so with the reference to regulate contained use of living modified organisms and living modified organisms in transit. So we would not support the deletion as suggested by the EU. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. With the explanation by Switzerland, could maybe the EU withdraw its suggestion to delete the text? Portugal? Yes, Portugal, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm speaking on behalf of the EU and member states just to pass also this message. And well, if the new text is not to be deleted as we suggested, if it is kept, we would like to kept also the suggestion made by Colombia. So we support, if not deleted the text that we suggest, we support the addition of Colombia. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, if the text by Colombia is accepted, then you could accept to delete your text. So you could accept addition of Colombia, right? I just would like to make sure I got you right. Please, Portugal.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Can you hear me well? Yes.
I can hear you.
Just to clarify, thank you for that because I was not very clear indeed. If our suggestion of deletion is not kept, so if we include and kept the original text, we would like to support the suggestion made by Colombia. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, then I think it was clear. So we do have, if we have an original text, then I would like to ask if it could be accepted with the addition made by Colombia. So yes, you could. So maybe, Secretary, if you can read out the text as proposed now with the Colombian addition.
Yes, Madam Chair, encourages parties that have not yet done so to adopt the necessary measures to regulate contained use of living modified organisms and living modified organisms in transit, as well as unintentional transboundary movement, and recognizes the importance of supporting those parties in adopting such measures and developing capacities in that regard.
Thank you, Secretariat. So with that addition, is the text para acceptable? I see no objection, is so approved. So we now move on to next section. I, information sharing. And I start with para 34, notes with positive trends regarding information sharing, etc. Is that text acceptable, the parties? I see no objection, so approved. Let's move on to para 35. Calls on parties and encourages other users. I think that could be acceptable. I see no objections, is so approved. Let's move on to para 36. Welcomes the fact that almost all parties have designated the national focal point for the Cartagena Protocol and the focal points of Biosafety Clearinghouse. I think that can be acceptable. I see no objections. Is so approved. Para 37 notes the progress by parties in designating the focal point of contact. I think that can be acceptable to parties. I see no objections. Is so approved. Para 38. Let's start with urge parties that have not yet completely done so. Is this para acceptable? I see no objections. The para 38 is approved. Para 39. Request the Executive Secretary to ensure. Acceptable to parties. I see no objections. Is so approved. And we can now move on to next sections. J, compliance and review. And I start with para 40. Notes considerable variation in progress. I think that can be acceptable. See no objections. 40 is approved. Para 41 welcomes the progress made by parties. I guess that can be acceptable to parties. This para. See no objections. Is so approved. Para 42 notes the concern that a large number of parties are not in full compliance, etc. I guess this para can be acceptable to parties. I see no objections. Is so approved. Para 43 recognizes the need for parties to have in place monitoring and enforcement systems for the implementation of the protocol. I guess it can be acceptable. See no objections. So approved. And para 44 welcomes the Compliance Committee supportive role. Acceptable to parties. See no objections. So approved. And para 45 request for Executive Secretary as appropriate, etc. I think it can be acceptable to parties. See no objections. So approved. And then we move on to the section K. Public awareness and participation, biosafety education and training. And I start with para 46. I hope it can be accepted. I see no objections. So approved. Para 47 notes the progress in the development of mechanisms for public participation. I see no objections. So approved. Para 48 encourages parties and invite other users. Acceptable to parties. I see no objections. Is so approved. And then we go, I think it is the final section. Section L, outreach and cooperation. Start with para 49. Stress the importance of cooperation. No objections, so approved. And para 50 also stresses the importance of outreach. I see no objections, so approved. And finally, para 51 encourage parties to provide. And I do have a comment here. Portugal on behalf of EU and its member states. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In this paragraph, because we think that is more related with capacity building and development in the scope of Agenda 7, we suggest the deletion of this para. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal, on behalf of EU and its member states. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We prefer to keep in brackets this paragraph. Thank you.
Thank you, Colombia. Well, okay, we keep para 51 in brackets. Costa Rica, you have the floor. I think Costa Rica disappeared, but I now see Brazil. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In line with Colombia, Brazil would like to support retaining paragraph 51. Thank you.
Thank you, 51. Sorry, thank you, Brazil. Portugal, you have heard support to keep para 51. Could you accept to keep the text as it is? Portugal, on behalf of EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Well, in this case, we would like to keep in brackets if the other parties don't agree with the deletion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal, on behalf of EU and its member states. I then suggest that para 51 is put into square brackets. With those square brackets, I assume that the para could be approved. I see no objections, so decided. So, yes, dear colleagues, we now have gone through the whole CRP1. And I see no more requests for the floor. CRP1 is approved. Thank you so much. With the support of the Secretariat, I will prepare an LDoc document for later consideration by the meeting when we resume, hopefully in person. So let us now move on to the next agenda item. And I now invite delegates to consider agenda item 7 on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication. As you recall, after the first reading of this agenda item, I proposed to prepare, with support of the Secretariat, CRPs on 1. Communication, 2. Knowledge management and the clearinghouse mechanism, and 3. On capacity building and development to support the effective implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. These are now available as CRP3, CRP4, and CRP6 respectively. As you may recall, I also established a contact group to address the contentious issues in the elements of the draft recommendations contained in document SBI-3/7 on capacity development and technical and scientific cooperation, and to prepare a draft CRP. Before we begin discussions on the CRPs, you may recall that the co-chairs of the contact group, Mr. Hayo Hanstra of the Netherlands and Mr. Alfred Oteng-Yeboah of Ghana, who were assisted by Ms. Laura Bermudez of Colombia, provided a progress report on the work of the contact group on 30th May. The contact group had one more meeting since then, and I invite the co-chairs to provide us with an update on the progress made. And I understand that this report will be given by one of the co-chairs, Mr. Hayo Hanstra of the Netherlands. So, Mr. Hayo Hanstra, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to present to you, on behalf of my co-chairs, Alfred Oteng-Yeboah from Ghana and Mrs. Laura Bermudez of Colombia, a report on the work of the contact group on capacity building and development and technical and scientific cooperation. Madam Chair, since our last progress report to plenary on Sunday, May the 30th, the contact group met one more time and discussed Annex 4. Annex 4 is on the draft terms of reference of the informal advisory group on technical and scientific cooperation, as well as the preambular paragraphs and 6 operative paragraphs of the draft recommendations on technical and scientific cooperation. This is paragraphs 20 to 25 of CRP 13, section B on technical and scientific cooperation, that is paragraph 26 to 36. We were also unable to discuss the preambular paragraphs under section A on capacity building and development, as well as operative paragraph 19. From the onset, Madam Chair, it was our intent to deliver a clean draft CRP for consideration by this plenary. Unfortunately, time was not in our favor to complete discussions of all the elements of the draft recommendations, as you mandated us to do. Nonetheless, we are pleased to convey for your consideration CRP 13 on capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, and technology transfer. In conclusion, we would like to thank all participants in the contact group for their constructive engagement and patience throughout our sessions. I would also like to thank the observers that participated in the group and to those parties that supported their interventions. Last but not least, we would also like to thank the colleagues from the Secretariat who supported our discussions, as well as all the technicians and moderators working behind the scenes to facilitate our discussions and ensure they are carried out in an effective manner. These are not normal times, and we have had to get used to different ways of working. Despite these challenges, we believe that we accomplished a lot and that we have taken another important step towards recognizing the importance of capacity development and technical and scientific cooperation as effective means of implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hanstad, and thank you, Mr. Oteng-Yeboah and Ms. Bermudez, for your very hard work and dedication. I now propose that we take up all the CRPs under agenda item 7 in the following order. To start 1 with CRP 3 on communication, and then continue with second, CRP 4 on knowledge management and the clearinghouse mechanism, and then 3, CRP 6 on capacity building and development to support the effective implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. As I mentioned at the beginning of yesterday's session, CRP 13 on capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, and technology transfer will be deferred to the resumed phase session of SBI-3. So, colleagues, let us begin our consideration with CRP 3 on communication. I would like to go through this document paragraph by paragraph so that we can approve this CRP. So let's start with CRP 3 on communication. I see that Belgium has raised your hand. Would you like to comment before we start on this? Belgium?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you. We were just wondering, because we have, based on the report from the co-chairs, we would like to ask for some intercessional work. Do you want us to make a statement on this now, or do you want us to wait for tomorrow? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Belgian, I think that I would suggest that you come back tomorrow and you can raise this. I think it can be done just before when you do the report of the meeting. I think that would be an appropriate place. I look at the Secretariat for advice on this. Tomorrow, Secretariat?
I think we could take it up tomorrow when we bring up the report, but I also want to remind everyone that there's no time for intersessional work, really. Thank you.
Uganda, you had the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Uganda would like to call your attention to the statement made by DRC yesterday, speaking on behalf of the Africa region, calling for the bracketing of all SBI CRPs that are relevant to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Uganda wishes to reiterate the essence and rationale of that statement, and accordingly, in the absence of DRC, who are unable to connect, Uganda calls for the bracketing of CRPs for Agenda Item 7, and specifically CRP3, CRP4, and CRP6. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. We take note of that statement. I will then start with the CRP3 on communication. And I would like to go through this document para by para so we can approve this CRP. And if you just allow me, I will just, before we start, just consult for a minute with the Secretariat. So just a few minutes. Thanks. So colleagues, welcome back. I gave you a few minutes. I hope you have time to maybe grab some water. Be ready for next CRP. CRP3. And I will start with the CRP that starts with subsidiary body implementation. We do have a preambular paragraph starting with welcoming with appreciation. And I assume that that para could be approved. Any objections? I say none is so approved. Let's then move on to para 1. And this para So sorry if I missed the other preamble paragraph, recommends that the conference parties at 15, but I think that one is also acceptable. Sorry, Canada, you had the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone. My comment is on paragraph 1. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. We generally agree with the new paragraph. However, we'd like to reference the decision where the committee was adopted, and I believe it's 7/24 and 8/6. Sorry. This could be footnoted, not to disturb the paragraph, just so we don't play around with it too much. But we'd like to bring something. We think that perhaps the mandate of the committee should be reviewed at some point, considering the forthcoming adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the communication strategy that will support it. We recall that the mandate of the IAC was to review, monitor, and provide advice to the Executive Secretary on the program of work for CIPA. We're wondering, for example, if the communication strategy for the post-2020 will be part of this work program. And all the pieces are going to fit together. For instance, the program of work, the framework for communication strategy, and the communication strategy for the post-2020. We understand that we don't necessarily have time to discuss this today, but it will merit some discussion at COP15. So in the meantime, I think that we'll want to maybe add some requests to the IAC, specific requests to the IAC, and we'll come to this as we review the CRP. So my comment for this paragraph is just to footnote the reference to the decision, but we'll have later. We have some comment on specific requests for the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Colombia?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you again. I'm sorry I wasn't able to hear you. So with respect to paragraph 1, although we supporting this paragraph in general, in our statement in plenary, we mentioned that we don't have too much clarity with respect to the activities, the scope of the communications flotilla. So since we didn't have the opportunity to discuss this issue further, we would request to keep in brackets the text and participants in the communications flotilla.
Yes, thank you, Colombia. Argentina, you had the floor.
En línea con el de Colombia, no entendemos.
In line with what Colombia said, we don't know why we need to concentrate on the participants of this informal group. So we would like to ask that we delete the reference to participants in the communications flotilla. And additionally, we think it's important that if we're going to extend the membership of the Informal Advisory Committee, we should also extend the membership of the representatives nominated by party and consider regional balance, the communication strategy, and all the guidance on communication has to have a vision of the reality of everyone. So our suggestion would be that after extend its membership to add, comma, in consultation with the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties, comma, to representatives nominated by parties, comma, and then we can continue with to Indigenous peoples and local communities, full stop. Or rather, comma, considering regional balance would be added at the end. Thank you very much.
Repeat your suggestion once again, and so we can cover it. Thank you.
Después de
Yes, of course. So after extend its membership, we would add, comma, in consultation with the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties, comma, to representatives nominated by parties, comma, and then continues with Indigenous peoples and local communities, delete, participants in the communications flotilla, and add, comma, considering regional balance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Argentina. And I give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Chair, once again. Yeah, in line with what Colombia and Argentina have said, we understand that it would be premature to introduce reference to the participants in the communications flotilla, given the fact that we didn't have time to have further discussions on this initiative, and we understand that the membership of this initiative is pretty limited among parties. So we understand that at this time we should not embrace an initiative that is pretty limited among parties. And from the outset, Brazil would support Argentina's proposal to include representatives nominated by parties and in consultation with the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties, and also ensuring a regional balance. So this would be our reaction to Para 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. And I give the floor to Belgium on behalf of EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we can understand the added text by Argentina or Colombia, I do not recall exactly. However, normally within the Informal Advisory Committee, it's not in consultation with the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties. So we would like to delete that part. And for the time being, we would like to keep participants in the communications flotilla, based on the fact that when we're discussing the framework, we'll have probably more information about who those participants are and also the participation of the parties in that flotilla. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. If I understand you correctly, you didn't want to add the text in consultation with the Bureau of the Conference of Parties. You would like to delete that text suggested. Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair. That's because for all the other IACs, it has never been done through consultation with the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties. So we would like to start this now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. And I give the floor to Uganda.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies for taking the floor again. But Madam Chair, I'd like to seek your guidance on a procedural issue regarding the approval of the paragraphs that we're going through this. Whether or not the approval is subject to the call made by DRC and the call made by Uganda a few minutes ago concerning bracketing the entire document. What is your guidance on this procedure, Madam Chair? Thank you.
Thank you, Uganda. My plan was to go through the CRP para by para, and when I will finalize the CRP, I will come back to your request to put a bracket on the whole CRP. But first, I would like to go through the para by para and make sure that I cover all comments on the paragraphs. So I will then come back to your request. I hope that is clear. Yes. Uganda, is that okay for you?
Yes, it's clear, but Uganda still reserve the right to come back at the end of this to request for a bracketing of the entire text. Thanks, Madam Chair.
And I have noted that clearly. So thank you very much for reminding me. Canada, I would like to give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry to have to come into this, but on Uganda's request, we were quite willing, of course, as we have with other CRPs, to work through and build on the hard work that we've all spent and all invested over the last 6 weeks. We understand, of course, the challenges that have existed, in particular for our distinguished colleagues from Africa, but also from other regions, and so understand that. But I think what we are generally not willing to do is to go and do this work today only to come at the end and be told that we're going to disregard that work. And so we would appreciate if perhaps you could take a few minutes to consult and come to a decision on this before we actually put in all this time and effort. I'd also like some clarification from you on whether or not this is going to be a ruling that's going to be applied to all CRPs at SBI. Because we note that yesterday we applied that to one CRP but not to another. And then this morning we took the time, and of course we completely agree on doing this, we took the time to go through a CRP, but yet on this one, for some reason, we can't. And so we'd like to get some clarity as well as to whether or not we're going to be consistent across all of the CRPs in the way we approach them. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I would suggest we can do like the following now. I will also give the floor to the youth, and then I suggest we take our 50 minutes break. So then I will also have time to consult with the Secretariat. So youth, if you have any specific comment on para 1?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. On paragraph 1, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network suggests to include a call to ensure continued representation from youth in the informal advisory committee, given our high stake and contributions in matters of education and communication. We put a lot of priority on this and would very much like to continue to participate in discussions around communication, education, and public awareness. We therefore propose to add to the end of the paragraph and ensure continued representation from youth organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, youth. And I will ask parties if there are any support for the suggested amendment from youth. If you could please add that in the chat. If there is any support for the text amendment just proposed by the youth. I see Morocco. You have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is just for the information of the youth group. The flotilla actually indicates that there are young people involved. So if we add youth in the text, really it's redundant in a certain way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Morocco. Can I ask the Secretary if there is any support for the youth statement in the chat? Okay. No support for a statement. Okay. I think we had gone through this para 1, but before I conclude on para 1, I would suggest that we take a 50 minutes break. Come back by 8:30, right? 50 minutes Montreal time. And I hope you have a nice break. See you soon. Colleagues, welcome back. Well, colleagues, I would like to suggest that we now do the following. Since we have started to go through the CRP3 para by para, I would very much like to complete it. You know, it's a very short CRP, and I would therefore like to continue with the CRP, go through it para by para, and before I conclude the whole CRP, I would like to go back to the point raised by Uganda on behalf of the African region and also the point raised by Canada. So I can comment on that and the procedures ahead. I hope that that could be acceptable to you, so we can just, since we now have started on this CRP, we can conclude it, go through it para by para, but before I conclude the whole CRP, I go back to this point. Could that be acceptable? I see that Norway has raised its hand. And could that be acceptable? Norway, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, that's fully acceptable to us. We would like to work on these documents. They are CRP documents, they're not L documents. So we would really like to work us through those documents. So my intervention was, and I'm sorry for coming back to this, Madam Chair, but it's regarding Para 1 youth. I believe made an intervention, and Norway would like to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway. Is noted. Okay, let us now go through para by para, and I promise you that before I conclude this CRP, I will come back to all concerns raised. So we were at CRP 3 para 1, and we had just heard that the suggested amendment made by youth had support by Norway. Maybe the Secretariat could be so kind to read out now the text with all the amendments, so it's clear to everybody. Secretariat? If you can read out Para 1 with the amendments suggested. Yes, you have the floor, Secretariat.
Thank you. Decides to renew the mandate of the Informal Advisory Group on Communications, Education and Public Awareness. And then we make a footnote reference to the decisions related to the IAC until 2030 and extend its membership, and this is in brackets, in consultation with the Bureau of the Conference of Parties, close brackets, to representatives nominated by parties, considering regional balance, to indigenous peoples and local communities, and ensure continued representation of youth organizations. Thanks.
Thank you. And I also understood that the EU and its member states would like to keep the text and participants in the communications flotilla. I think that is correct. Belgium?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And sorry, we would like to keep that part about the flotilla. But however, the Secretariat just read it. It's now informal advisory group, whereas it has always been an informal advisory committee. So we do not understand why the change from committee to group. If the Secretariat can explain that, we prefer to keep committee.
Apologies, that was my fault. It's committee.
Thank you, Secretariat.
Thank you, Secretariat. Well, with those amendments and some text in square brackets as explained, could the para be acceptable? I see no objections, is so approved. Let's move on to para 2, And I do have a question on the floor from Switzerland. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Yes, we have a comment regarding paragraph 2. And currently, this paragraph suggests to decide that the committee meets at least once in person. And we would prefer at this point not to decide on the modalities of the meeting. So in other words, to decide already now if it should take place virtually or in person. Therefore, we suggest to delete in the second line in person. So it would read, will hold at least one meeting during the biennium. And then as a result, we suggest also to delete the rest of the paragraph. So we suggest to delete as well as virtual meetings when needed. Thank you very much.
Also decides that the Informal Advisory Committee on Communication, Education and Public Awareness, subject to availability of resources, will hold at least one meeting during biennium. That's correct. Yeah, thank you. Belgium, on behalf of EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do not prefer the changes proposed by Switzerland. We would like to keep the original text as it was. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, EU. Okay, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, we shared the similar view to Switzerland, and particularly when we were talking about in-person meetings, we've seen how we have multiple ways to meet these days, and we're meeting virtually right now. So we support the suggested change by Switzerland to delete the at least one in person, but just to keep it as how it was read out, that you will hold a meeting during the biennium. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, UK. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brazil would like to support the EU on keeping the original phrasing of this paragraph. As we already have been seeing the limitations of virtual meetings, we do find it important to keep the reference to at least one in-person meeting. As I understand, this would provide a more balanced approach to the work of the informal committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Well, I think the easiest way is to put the text in brackets, since there are both suggestions to delete and to keep the original text. So the suggested deletion will be put in brackets. With that change, is a para acceptable to parties? I see no objection, is so approved. Let's then move on to para 3. Encourages parties to use and share communication messages. And I see Canada. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We note that this is a new paragraph, and our proposal for this one would be to turn the paragraph into a request to the IAC. And the reason why we're suggesting this is because we think that it's not clear which messages we're referring to. We suspect that they are the messages that are found in the program of work of the communication, education, and public awareness. That being said, we note that these messages will have to be updated to reflect the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, given that the previous one focused on the 2011-2020 strategic plan. Therefore, we think a good way could be to request the CEPA IAC to develop updated key messages. And I can read my proposal. It would read as follows. Request the Informal Advisory Committee on Communication, Education, and Public Awareness to draft action-oriented key messages to inform and mobilize action from all actors, private and public, for parties' consideration at SBI-4 and COP16. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Canada. And if I understand, this is a text you would like to add, and then keep the other text should retain or be deleted?
I would like to change it for this paragraph, yeah.
Okay, so you would like to rephrase this paragraph and with your text and then delete the other ones?
That's correct.
Okay, could you please just read out again your text? Thanks.
Request the informal advisory committee on communication, education, and public awareness to draft action-oriented key messages to inform and mobilize action from all actors, private and public, for parties' consideration at SBI-4 and COP16. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we got it now. And then the text encourage parties use share would then be deleted. Right.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. UK, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, as Canada's text has only just been introduced, and it does look like a good text. I think we would be happy to support that. But my original comments were going to be on the original text. So if you'll allow, I'll continue with the comments that I was going to make on the original language until we agree what the placement might be. But I do wonder whether we could keep the Canadian proposal in addition to the original 3. It looks like it might be a useful paragraph 2 bis, because it would have some work to do. But on the original text, I had 2 suggestions for amendments. The first one being at the beginning, where we're talking about encouraging parties to use and share communications messages. I think we would also like to invite all stakeholders to also use and share communications messages. We often find that governments aren't necessarily the ones that are the most effective at sharing some of these communications, and other organisations do it better sometimes than we do it ourselves. So we would like to insert here encourages parties and invites all stakeholders. So that was my first suggestion. The second amendment that we would like to see in here is in later in the paragraph, which talks about mobilising sufficient and predictable human and financial resources. We would like the sufficient and predictable to be put into square brackets. This is talking about national parties working in a national capacity, and I think it's for those parties to determine themselves what resources they want to mobilise. So I don't think we need to have sufficient and predictable included in this section. So those are the 2 changes from the UK. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, UK. In accordance with what you suggest, I then put the proposal by Canada as 2 bis. But before I do that, I would just come back to Canada and ask if this is a new text or is it something that you proposed during the first reading? Canada? If you could clarify.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We note that this is a new paragraph, so we're responding to it. And that's the reason why we're proposing this new text. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Canada. Belgium, on behalf of EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to support the first addition by the UK and invites all stakeholders. However, towards the end of the paragraph, we would like to delete and to mobilize, etc., until the end of the paragraph, because we think that this is up to discussions under agenda item 6 on resource mobilization. Then for the new paragraph or the addition by Canada, we do not believe that it's the task of the Informal Advisory Committee on Communication, Education and Public Awareness to draft key messages. We do not believe that it's up to an IAC to do this type of work. They can assist the Secretariat when they're drafting key messages and give comments on them, but it's not up to the IAC to draft action-oriented key messages. Thank you, Madam Chair. So we would like to not add the proposal by Canada, but maybe at the end to come a little bit together to what Canada wants. We could probably add somewhere in consultation or in, let me just look at it. We could add somewhere that they should be drafted in consultation with the IAC. Thank you, Madam Chair. But I do not know yet where. We have to look better into the text.
Yes, thank you, Belgium. Maybe when I go to Colombia, Argentina, and Switzerland, maybe you can think about a drafting suggestion. I come back to you then. I go on with my list with Colombia. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we do have a comment on the original paragraph. We would like to include in the last sentence, which is currently in brackets, after these tasks, the text in accordance with Article 20 of the Convention.
Thank you, Colombia. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a bit difficult to follow the discussion because it's not quite clear if we're working on one paragraph or the other. But on Canada's proposal, we agree that it's a good form to make progress. Perhaps we need to work slightly on, in the light of what the European Union has said, namely what is going to be the function of IAC and who's actually going to draft the oriented or action-oriented key messages, because that's not clear in the original paragraph 3. So I think we should maintain Canada's proposal and continue to work on it afterwards. And we also support what Colombia has said in the original 3 to add at the end, in accordance with Article 20 of the Convention. It's necessary to bear in mind the role of the parties when drafting these key messages in general. Right throughout this recommendation, that needs to be clear, and we need to highlight that when it comes to the communication strategy, it's very important that we continue with this after the Global Biodiversity Framework has been adopted. It has to be in line with the vision of the parties on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Our comment relates to the original paragraph 3, and we support the addition by the UK to add encourage parties and invites all stakeholders. However, then we suggest to amend line 2 accordingly, where it says through relevant national media channels. It's here not exactly clear what is meant with national media channels when also all stakeholders are invited. So we suggest to just delete national, and then it would say to share the communication messages through relevant media channels. And then regarding the comment by Colombia and Argentina regarding to add at the end of this paragraph in accordance with Article 20 of the Convention, we don't see a need to add this in this paragraph and suggest to put it in brackets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Switzerland. And now give the floor to Mexico. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning from Mexico. We would like to support the suggestion made by the UK. And as the I'm going to use the translation option. So,
So, in order to try and resolve what's been put forward by Colombia on Article 20, perhaps another option would be in accordance with national circumstances. And then on the original text, we'd like it to be invites parties rather than encourages. So that our proposal would be about the mobilization of financial and human resources. For us, that's why we think it would be better to say invites. Thank you at the beginning.
Yes, thanks, Mexico. So it will be that you, instead of encourages, you would like to invite in the beginning, and then I understood that it could be, just to make sure I follow your proposal, that you could, instead of in accordance with Article 20 of the Convention, you had an alternative proposal in accordance with
national circumstances.
In accordance with national circumstances.
Or national possibilities, yeah.
And that would replace with Article 20 of the Convention.
Just as an option.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brazil?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry I was not hearing you. Brazil would like to support the proposal of an alternative paragraph by Canada. And regarding the original paragraph 3, we would support Colombia's proposal to add a reference to Article 20 at the end of the paragraph. But we think that the proposal made by Canada provides a more balanced way to carry the discussions on how to develop those communication messages. So we'd like to support the alternative text provided by Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. And I now give the floor to Belgium on behalf of EU and its member states. And I hope that maybe you have a suggestion how to merge the idea by Canada into original para 3. Belgium, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we're just wondering now a little bit what this paragraph really reads, because as far as we can see it, it now reads, encourages parties and invites all stakeholders to share the communication messages. But we're wondering where those communication messages come from. So that should be clarified first. So maybe we could add something developed by the Executive Secretary in consultation with the Informal Advisory Committee in order to inform, where did it go then? Through relevant media channels, etc. Then with regards to the addition of Article 20 of the Convention, we are wondering why it was added, because it says and invites all stakeholders now. So we cannot invite all stakeholders in accordance with Article 20 of the Convention. So we're a little bit confused with this. So we propose, we agree with Switzerland to delete this addition. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium, on behalf of EU and its member states. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to seek clarification on the role of the SIPA group. Our understanding was that their mandate was to review, monitor, and provide advice to the Executive Secretariat on the program of work for SIPA. We know that the key messages are in the work program of the SIPA work program. So we're wondering if it would be, in fact, their duty to review it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, yes, maybe Secretary can give some clarification on this. The question just raised by Canada on the mandate of this committee.
Yes, it's right that the job of the IAC is to provide advice to the ES and to monitor, etc., as Portugal said right now. we're kind of frozen here a little bit, and so we are struggling with technology right now. So please bear with us. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. David, you would like to come in?
Yeah, sorry, maybe I can add. So I think in terms of the scope of the issues addressed by the Informal Advisory Committee, it's fine. Yes, they can certainly advise on such matters. I just note, though, the Informal Advisory Committee, as with the other informal advisory committees that have been established, is a body that advises the Executive Secretary. It's therefore not usually a body that reports in of itself directly to the convention's intergovernmental bodies. Of course, the reports are made available, but it's understood that this is advice to the Executive Secretary. And therefore, if work would need to be done that is going to inform the work of SBI or the COP, then the usual formulation would be to request the Executive Secretary with the advice of the Informal Advisory Committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Secretariat, for that clarification. Well, what we now have on, yes, Canada, please come back.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the clarification from the Secretariat. So we could change our proposal to, in the line of what was just suggested, request the Executive Secretary in consultation or with the support of the Advisory Committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Canada. So, if we do have now a suggested 2 bis requested from Canada with support of some parties, and as just rephrased, it could read out, as I understand it, request Executive Secretary with the support of the Informal Advisory Committee on Communication, Education and Public Awareness to draft action-oriented key messages to inform and mobilize action from all sources, all actors, private and public, for consideration at SBI-3 and COP16. I also heard that the EU maybe would like to merge those texts, but maybe for the EU could live with this text rephrased as this. Belgium, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The way the new paragraph reads now, request the Executive Secretary with support of the Informal Advisory Committee on Communication, blah, blah, blah. Sorry for the blah, blah. To draft action-oriented key messages. We would like to remind you also that other people can also draft messages and we can use it. So it's not just drafting action-oriented messages by the Secretariat, but also maybe if there's other parties or stakeholders that come up with messages, to share them. You understand what I mean? I don't have wording for this at this moment, but we shouldn't just ask the Secretariat to draft action-oriented key messages. We should, in a certain way, also take into account that they can also come from other sources. So we could probably say something like to promote, so after CIPA, to promote the use of action-oriented key messages, and then the sentence could continue. Would that maybe help you? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Belgium. Could I ask the Secretary to read out the suggested 2 bis now, so everybody can hear it clearly? Secretariat? Yes, Secretariat, if you read out the text. Okay.
I'll read it out.
Okay.
Requests the Executive Secretary, with the support of the Informal Advisory Committee on Communications, Education and Public Awareness, to promote the use of, and then in brackets there's draft, action-oriented key messages to inform and mobilize action from all actors, private and public, for consideration at SBI-4 and COP16.
Thank you, Secretariat. And then we continue with para 3, that I think now, if you could read out para 3 as well, so we can maybe take a decision both at the same time.
Yes. In brackets, encourages, and in brackets, invite. Parties and invites all stakeholders to share the communications messages through relevant media channels and social media, especially action-oriented messages, in order to inform and mobilize action from all actors, private and public, and, in brackets, to mobilize sufficient and predictable human and financial resources to carry out these tasks, and then again brackets, in accordance with, again brackets, national circumstances and, close brackets, but still within the brackets, Article 20 of the Convention.
Yes, thank you, Secretariat. I think we have now covered all ideas, so you will have a 2bis and 3. Those two, Canada, you had the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe just a way forward to so that we can continue would be to just to promote the use and to keep draft. The reason why we mention draft key messages is because they need to be updated. They were aligned with the 2011-2020 action plan, and so we would need to update them eventually. So maybe a way forward is just to keep both options in brackets. Thank you.
Okay, so both draft is now in brackets, but also to promote in 2bis. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. With all those brackets, could para 2bis and 3 be acceptable to parties? I see no objection. Argentina, you had the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The problem is that if we keep the 2 paragraphs, in the original 3, we didn't understand exactly what these messages would be, especially these action-oriented messages and how they should be used. Because with Canada's proposal, be clear that we're talking about the messages that can be considered in SBI-4 and can be adopted in COP16. But if we don't have that paragraph, we don't know exactly which messages we're referring to in paragraph 3. Given that, we think until we can understand the logic of what's first and second, I think we need to keep both of these paragraphs in square brackets.
Gina, well, my understanding was that both those paras would be kept, but it's not alternatives. It's the 2bis and then 3 is following 2bis. But of course, we can also put the whole paras in brackets. I think 2bis is now in brackets, but also para 3 in brackets. So we can come back on that. I hope that can be accepted for Argentina.
Yes, that is acceptable. Thank you.
Okay, we have, with all those brackets, I hope that 2bis and 3 can be approved. I see no objections, so decided. Let's then move on to para 4. Para 4 starts with request the Executive Secretary to continue work on the activity listed in the note, etc. And I see Belgian on behalf of EU and its member states. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I wouldn't like to start yet with paragraph 4 because in our statement, speaking time during the reading of agenda item 7 was limited. The EU made a proposition to have a paragraph inserted on the Global Coalition under the banner United for Biodiversity under agenda item 5. And we mentioned that we prefer to have communication discussed under agenda item 7. In our written submission for agenda item 7, this additional paragraph was added, but it doesn't show in this text. So we therefore would like to insert the following paragraph, if you can agree on that. Can I read it out?
Yes, please read it out and in dictation speed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it would read as follows: welcoming the efforts by parties, other governments, indigenous people, local communities and stakeholders to foster wide public support for a strong post-2020 global biodiversity framework, including through the global coalition of organizations, museums, zoos, aquariums, botanical gardens, national parks and protected areas, research centers and universities from around the world under the banner United for Biodiversity, full stop. Do you want me to repeat this, Madam Chair?
Yes, I think it could be helpful. Please repeat.
Okay, yeah. I'll try to do it even a little bit slower if you want. So it would read as following: welcoming the efforts by parties, other governments, IPLCs and stakeholders to foster wide public support for a strong post-2020 GBF, including through the global coalition of organizations, museums, zoos, aquariums, botanical gardens, national parks and protected areas, research centers and universities from around the world under the banner United for Biodiversity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium, on behalf of EU and its member states. And I understood that that should be as we can put it as 3 bis. As a new paragraph. So I welcome comments on this new paragraph proposed by Belgium on behalf of EU and its member states. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. We propose that this paragraph be kept in brackets if it is going to be kept, because it's not clear what we are welcoming, what kind of work has been done, if there is work that has been done by these groups, are there any reports that are available for reviewing, and hence it's going to be very difficult to welcome what is not known. Of particular concern to us is the explanation of what Global Alliance. We are not familiar with what Global Alliance implies. So to be on the safe side, we rather just keep this whole paragraph in brackets, because it seems like it's preempting some of the issues we want to safeguard ourselves for. Thanks.
Thank you, South Africa. So, any more comments on this para? I would suggest then we can put the addition, the proposed new para by EU in brackets. Could that be acceptable to parties? We add access in brackets as a new para. I see no objection, is so approved. Let's now move on to para 4. And that para starts with request to Executive Secretary to continue. And I see Canada. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Around the lines that the EU mentioned, we know that there are some linkages between this paragraph and the agenda item 5 on post-2020. And we think that there needs to be further discussion on the linkages between the post-2020 global communication strategy and the communication work. For example, we're wondering, is the post-2020 communication strategy will supersede the framework for a communication strategy? It looks like we have two processes. And so we'd like to bracket this paragraph for now. And just to be clear, it's not because we don't agree with it. It's because we want to see how the pieces are going to fit together. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you, Canada. So Canada would like to have para 4 in brackets just as a reminder to see how it fits with the communication strategy and the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. That's clear. Any more comments on this para? Or can we approve it with the brackets just proposed by Canada? See no objections. It's so approved with brackets. Let's then move on to para 5. Also request the Executive Secretary to develop additional communication activities. And then etc. Canada, you had the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair, and excuse me for taking the floor again. For the same reason that we outlined in para 4, we just want to understand better the package, and we would do the same thing here, just bracket it, and once we have a better idea of all the pieces fit together, we can lift the bracket. Thank you. Thank you, Canada. So, with the suggested bracket by Canada, could para 5 be approved? I see no objection, is so approved. Let's then move on to para 6. And if we start with 6 with the chapeau text, I don't think there are any comments on the chapeau. UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I had a comment on the chapeau for this. It looks, we weren't really sure what was trying to be captured with some of the words here, where it talks about coordinate, configure and secure communications resources. That wording seems a little strange and we weren't 100% sure what was trying to be captured. From my perspective, we could delete those words and just request the Executive Secretary to support the range of communications activities, which makes this sentence shorter, but I think takes away some of that uncertainty of what those additional words were. So I also wonder whether we need to include the within available resources text into this chapeau as well. So my suggestion, and would be the following. The chapeau would read, further requests the Executive Secretary to support, within available resources, the range of communications activities needed for the following initiatives in the upcoming biennium. So that is just to delete a few words and add in within available resources. Thank you.
Thank you, UK. And I see Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We actually had a very similar revision idea for changing para 6 as the UK. So instead of adding our proposed changes, we will just support UK's proposal. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Norway. So we have a suggestion by UK supported by Norway. So this report text would read, further request to Executive Secretary to support within available resources the range of communications activities needed for the following initiatives in the upcoming biennium. With those amendments, are the report text agreeable to parties? Belgium, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The changes proposed by the UK, they look very interesting, but for sake of clarification, is that in the original text it says to coordinate, configure, and secure communication resources too. So it means that it goes beyond just for the Secretariat itself. So we would like to keep to coordinate and because we would like to keep the link also with the parties. So we would prefer to keep the original text, but if the UK can come up with some wording which would also link it to the parties, that would be welcome. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. Well, UK, do you have an alternative text taking into consideration the concerns just raised by the EU? Or could you accept the original text?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did wonder, because this paragraph goes on to list specific activities, whether we needed to include anything additional at the top there. I wonder if the EU's concern is around the word coordinate, and perhaps what we could suggest here is that we could request the Executive Secretary to coordinate with parties and to support. So we would just keep the word coordinate with parties, but would still lose configure and secure communications resources, which again is still unusual terms for us.
Thank you, UK. Would that suggestion be acceptable for the EU? It will then, yes, Belgium, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the EU and the Member States. With parties and stakeholders, would that be acceptable for the UK? Because we understand it only was asking now towards parties. So can we add and stakeholders? Would that be acceptable?
Okay, let me read it out and see if... So, further request to Secretary to coordinate with parties and stakeholders to support within available resources the range of communication activities needed for the following initiatives in the upcoming biennium. UK, could that be acceptable?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Further request the Executive Secretary too. I think we just need to move the within available resources. So we would request the Executive Secretary within available resources to, and then the activities come after that. So it would then coordinate with parties and stakeholders. And support, no, to support, coordinate with available, sorry, I'm drafting live.
Well, it's always very helpful somebody who has English as his mother tongue to help us.
I think it would work with available resources to coordinate with parties and stakeholders to support the range of communications. That I think would work. Thank you, Madam Chair. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you, UK. Well, maybe I can ask the Secretariat to read out the text as now proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So it is further request the Executive Secretary, within available resources, to coordinate with parties and stakeholders to support the range of communications activities needed for the following initiatives in the upcoming biennium. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I hope that Argentina, you had the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What seems a bit strange as it now stands in the drafting, because it seemed that at the beginning we were asking the Executive Secretary to coordinate with the parties and other stakeholders. And then it says to support the range of communications activities. And then we go into very specific questions that perhaps we don't need to ask for all this to be coordinated with the parties. So basically, I wonder whether instead of saying to coordinate with parties and stakeholders, perhaps we should say in coordination with parties and stakeholders. I think that would be more correct, because otherwise it's a bit strange, but perhaps I'm just mistaken.
The proposal for Argentina is to replace to coordinate with in coordination. So it would read, further request the Secretary within available resources in coordination with parties and stakeholders to, and then go on. And I ask if that could be acceptable. Maybe the Secretary can read out the whole para with the additions also made by Argentina and see if that could be acceptable to parties.
Sure. So further requests the Executive Secretary, within available resources, in coordination with parties and stakeholders, to support the range of communications activities needed for the following initiatives in the upcoming biennium. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I hope that this chapeau text can now be acceptable to parties. I see no objections. The chapeau text is approved. Thank you. Let's then move on to little a, the communication strategy. And Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We agree with this paragraph. However, we think that the communication strategy for the post-2020 should be adopted at COP15. So we're wondering why it's referenced as an INF document. We think it should be an official document. And we'd also like to make a small amendment. We'd like to add at the beginning the implementation. So it would read the implementation of the communication strategy and so on. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Canada. Do you have do you want to delete the reference to the INF document? Is that correct?
Well, I would like to remove the INF. It could be CBD/COP/15, but I don't think it should be an information document.
Okay, so we just delete INF and make it open. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Argentina, you have the floor.
In line with what Canada has just said, we too thought that the communication strategy has to be adopted by the parties. So our suggestion would be that we would add at the end, in particular, key messages agreed by the parties. So it would read, in particular, key messages agreed by parties. That is in line with what we said at the outset. Namely, it's very important to have a communication strategy which is in line with the vision of all the parties to the convention and which will be useful for communications for each of the parties to the convention. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. I now give the floor to Mexico. You have the floor.
Gracias, señora Presidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to support Canada. We think this cannot be in an annex. It's a report and it needs to be adopted by the parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. Belgium, on behalf of EU and its member states.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I think probably the brackets are around the CBD/COP/15 because it's not known yet what it will be, if it will first be an INF document or an add one, and then later it will be a decision. So if it will be a decision, you will have to add decision CBD/COP/15 and then the other things as Canada proposes. So that's why I think it's put between brackets from the start, because what Canada just said it will be a decision in the end. So then you should write decision CBD COP/15. Thank you. Then with regards to the addition by Argentina, we would like to keep this in brackets because it's too restrictive to already say in particular key messages agreed by parties, because in the communication strategy, we do not agree yet on particular key messages that will come later on, as we've seen in earlier paragraphs of this draft decisions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. I now give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, Brazil would like to support previous comments made by Canada and Argentina, and we'd like to express our support for the proposal made by Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Mexico, you have the floor.
Más para clarificar.
We just want to clarify what's been happening. We think that for us, it needs to be an annex and not a report. And we would like to support what Belgium just said in its final intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. The little a, as now with all the suggestions, would then read the implementation of a communication strategy which is accompanying the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, developed pursuant to Decision 14/34 as contained in, and then you have brackets, Decision CBD/COP/15, brackets, and then in brackets, in particular key messages agreed by parties, and then stop the bracket. With those changes, can the little a be acceptable to parties? I see no objection, is so agreed. And now move on to little b, to update the program of work on communication, etc. Could that be acceptable to parties? I see no objections. So read. And we then move on to little c. Let's start with corporate communications for the Secretariat. Are there any objections to this one? I see no objections. Is so approved. And then I go on to little d, working with partners such as those in the communications flotilla, etc. And I see Canada. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, our comment was here to delete this because we remember that at the beginning it was about securing resources, and we didn't think that we need to secure resources in order to collaborate with the stakeholder and other agencies. But now I'm confused with the first our first paragraph 6. So maybe if we could read paragraph 6 just to clarify if that works out with this little D.
Yes, thank you, Canada. Well, the 6 as amended and agreed should read out further requests to Executive Secretary within available resources in coordination with parties and stakeholders to support the range of communication activities needed for the following initiatives in the upcoming biennium. So that is a chapeau text.
Yes, it looks like we're already kind of collaborating with parties and stakeholders. So I'm wondering if this D is needed. But perhaps
Okay.
we'd love to hear from other parties.
Okay. Thank you, Canada. Well, let's hear from other parties. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Initially, and as per our comment in para 1, we wanted to request the deletion of the text that refers to those in the communications flotilla, but I think now Canada is right. With the new text in the chapeau, it seems like we are duplicating the reference to collaboration with stakeholders, so we would support Canada's proposal on deleting the little paragraph D. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. Belgium, on behalf of EU and its member states.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And we understand a little bit the confusion that it gives. However, we would like to keep somewhere because this paragraph was probably in before we added with parties and stakeholders. And maybe it could be then a separate paragraph, request the Secretary to work with partners, etc. Because we would like to add at the end of this paragraph the following text: in view of, comma, among others, awareness raising and action-oriented communication. So we would like to make, maybe then instead of having it as a small d, to have a separate paragraph on this. But we're in your hands. That would be the most logical thing to solve this problem and to really already give an intention of what could be the partners that the Secretary could work with. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. So your suggestion would be to, instead of having as a little d, it would be a separate paragraph with the text that is now in the little d, but adding in the end, in view of, among others, awareness raising and action-oriented communication. That's correct? Thank you.
Request the Secretariat at the beginning.
Okay. Request the Secretariat. Request the Secretary.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
So it will then be a 5 bis. 5 bis? No? Maybe it's, will it be 5 bis or 6 bis? Secretariat?
I think we could adjust the placement once we are finished here, but it could be either 5 bis or 6 bis, since all of these are paragraphs requesting work from the Executive Secretary. Thanks.
Thank you, Secretariat. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. From our point of view, Canada is quite right with their suggestion. This paragraph needs to be deleted because in the chapeau, we're already seeing that all of these subparagraphs are going to be carried out in coordination with the parties and stakeholders. So asking the Secretary to coordinate with stakeholders, the work by partners, we think is a bit redundant. And then to come on to what the European Union has proposed, we think it's reiterating what we have already said in paragraphs 3 and 2 bis or 3 bis, what we had at the beginning. So we would like that to be maintained in square brackets for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. Peru, you have the floor.
Señora Presidenta, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. I understand that it might seem a bit repetitive, but there are certain points that I think are very valuable. For example, when it talks about stakeholders, programs and agencies or relevant UN programs and agencies and multilateral environmental agreements, amongst others. I think the communication side of things is key to actually talk about the post-2020 framework in all of the different agencies and organizations and stakeholders. And I think that in this part, we have to keep in these references or put this content in another paragraph. If it could be included in the new paragraph bis, 6 bis or 5 bis. Thank you.
Thank you, Peru. Well, I would then suggest to put this text as amended by the EU in new 6 bis in brackets. So little d would be a new para, but in brackets. With that amendment, could that para be acceptable to parties? Switzerland, you had the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. If you allow us, we would just add something to the proposal by the EU that is in brackets, and namely just to add 6 bis in brackets requests the Executive Secretary subject or within available resources to work, etc. Is that clear?
Yes, thank you, Switzerland. So
thank you very much.
6 bis will then read in square brackets, requested secretary subject to available resources to work with partners such as those in the Communication Flotilla and the Informal Advisory Committee on Communication, Education and Public Awareness, stakeholders, relevant United Nations programs and agencies, and multilateral environmental agreements in view of, among others, awareness-raising and action-oriented communication. And the whole 6 bis will then be put in brackets. Could that be acceptable to parties? I see no objection, is so approved. And let's then move on to para 7. Request the Secretary to submit a progress report. I see no comments on this para 7 is so approved. Thank you so much. And just make sure, because I have just on my screen, is no more paras, right, in this CRP? No, that's the final one. Okay, colleagues. So we have now gone through all the paras. Thank you very much for your cooperation. And I now will, as promised, go back to what has been raised both by Uganda on behalf of the African group and also the concerns raised by Canada. Well, as far as I understand the intervention made by Uganda, where he also made a reference to the one that was done yesterday by the Democratic Republic of Congo, the reason why the African Union would like to put a bracket on the whole CRP is because to make they want on some CRPs that are relevant for post-2020. And as Uganda said, maybe, and I will ask Uganda, because I understood that it's not because they are opposing the content as such. it is because they want to make sure that there is a linkage to the package of a post-2020. So I will just ask Uganda if I have understood you correctly. Uganda, you have the floor.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you for your indulgence. And yes, that is the correct position of Uganda and for the Africa Group. Madam Chair, if you permit me, I'd like to say something on principle, an issue of principle.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. The words transformative change have become our mantra in our meetings, in our documents in the last 2.5 years or so. For us, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, this is our motivation and it is our commitment to strive for that transformative change. We failed in 2010. We have not done any better in 2020. We now have an opportunity to make a difference in 2030 and certainly in 2050. The CRPs that have a significant relevance to the GBF are therefore a very big deal for us. The fact that some of us have had limited or inadequate participation in the review of the documents, especially now the CRPs, that is a big deal for us. So consequently, for Uganda and indeed for many others in a similar position, the approval of the content of these CRPs at this stage, when our participation has been a struggle, will only be paying lip service to the significance that we attach to the transformative change that we claim to want to achieve. And so, Madam Chair, that is a big deal too. So we acknowledge and we appreciate the hard work done by those who have been able to participate effectively. We appreciate the commitment and sacrifice of some who have had to stay up very late into the hours of the night or morning. We know that many have put in a lot of effort, a lot of time in preparing for their participation, and we appreciate that. We acknowledge that there's been some progress, but this progress has been patchy, certainly not representative of the parties to the convention, and most importantly, those of us whose views need to be taken into account also. The progress achieved by a few cannot and must not be equated to consensus, not by a long shot. That is why we're looking at this as a package to the post-2020. That is why we're asking for bracketing of CRPs that have a substantial bearing on the post-2020 GBF, and which therefore might substantially impact the work of the open-ended working group. We're therefore asking this to safeguard the interests of those of us who have struggled with the process up to this point, because our participation has been extremely inadequate. Again, Madam Chair, we're looking at this as a package to the post-2020. We're not opposed to the content. We're just saying we have had limited participation. We want to have the opportunity to revisit these issues. That's why we're asking for bracketing of the text of the documents. With that, Madam Chair, specifically for CRP3, we still want to call for bracketing of this document. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. Speaking on behalf of the African region. And, well, as I see it, as also been clarified by Uganda, the reason to bracket this is not, as already has been said, that it will not oppose the content as such, but make this signal. And we have already agreed another CRP today that was not bracketed the same way. So I don't see that that will happen on all CRPs, as clarified. So I do hope, and I ask for your flexibility to agree on that I now suggest to put a bracket on the whole CRP, as suggested by Uganda, with that understanding that it's just a signal. We not making the final decisions now, but I have also listened to the concerns raised by those that really want to make progress, and I think we have done great progress. We have gone through all the paras, and we have heard a lot of views, and we have improved the text. Indeed, thank you very much for that. But I also think that is a fair concern raised by Uganda. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the distinguished delegate from Uganda for that explanation. And of course, as we've said before, we completely understand all the challenges and difficulties on trying to make these virtual meetings work. And I think, like others,
yes, Canada. Now you disappeared. No, absolutely not. You were not cut off. It was something with I think it's something internet connectivity in Canada right now. There seems to be problems. I'm sorry for that. I didn't do anything. Please, you were just starting your intervention, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll cut to the chase, obviously saying that we understand and, of course, are sympathetic to all the challenges that have been experienced by many parties in this meeting and understand that. We're just trying to look for clarity from you, Madam Co-Chair, going forward. We note that we don't think that, I'm trying to think back if any of the CRPs, and I understand that this is just an SBI meeting, but we agreed last week or earlier this week to CRPs under Substa that had references to post-2020. And we agreed to one earlier this morning that had references to post-2020, but yet we're not fully square bracketing those. And so just so we can understand going forward, which ones, so we're going to bracket some of the CRPs that mention post-2020, but not all of them? We'd like some clarity on kind of what what we're going to do going forward, and so we can probably focus our time a little better. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. Norway, you had the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. To this question, I would advise against bracketing whole documents. I do understand the concerns of Africa, but I think we should rather try to reflect those concerns in the final report from the meeting, because I'm afraid if that bracketing whole documents would sort of give a bad signal for the way forward, because we would have to work on documents also in the open and working group and all the way to COP15. So I would rather suggest that we sort of that those kind of concerns are reflected in the report rather than in bracketing whole documents. Thank you. We put a lot of work in this document, so I think that would be sort of to strike a fair balance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Norway. Well, I have heard the concerns raised. I just would like to highlight that it was very clear, as I understood from the intervention made by Uganda, is not all CRPs they want to have bracketed. They specifically raised some of them under agenda item 7. And on the other hand, as already mentioned, we know that this meeting will not take any final decisions. We will take all the decisions on the LDOC when we have face-to-face meeting, when we meet again. And I have also think that we have done useful progress when we've gone through all the paras. Colombia, you had the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as we have already also mentioned in previous plenaries where this oh, sorry.
Sorry, I don't know what happened, but you disappeared, but now you're back again. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to say that we fully support the proposal that Norway has just suggested on reflecting these concerns in the report of the meeting. We have previously mentioned in other plenaries in which the African concern has been raised that we don't want this situation to become a precedent in the process and in the meetings that we have ahead for the negotiation of the post-2020 framework. So even if we are empathetic and we understand all the concerns raised by the African group, we do believe that with your support, Madam Chair, we have made considerable progress in these virtual sessions. So at this point, we're not able to support the suggestion on bracketing the entire CRP. We would really like to move forward in this process. We believe we are able to do that. And in the last month and a half, we have been seeing that it is possible to move forward. So we would like to support Norway's proposal on including these concerns in the report of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Colombia. I have been informed we have 5. We're running out of time. So first I will ask Uganda if that could be an option for you to, instead of bracketing the whole CRP, could have your concerns and your views clearly indicated in the report on the meeting. Uganda, could that be acceptable as a way forward as proposed by Norway?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thank you for your indulgence. No, Madam Chair, regrettably, that report that Canada and Norway are referring to is not acceptable to us. The bracketing of text is a standard, an established UN procedure, and that's what we are calling for, that we're calling for bracketing the entire document. We're not saying delete it, we're not saying get rid of it, we're saying bracket it so that we can come back to it at a later stage, and for the reasons that we've provided. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. South Africa, you had the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to support what the spokesperson for the Africa region has just said, if we heard him correctly, he said we are not against working and improving the contents of the documents, but as an acknowledgement that these documents, these issues be treated as a package in considering the outcomes of the open-ended working group, and that does not prevent any focus and use of energy to develop the documents towards the final decision-making COP. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on the suggestion to have a reference in the report. I still, regardless if some documents are put in brackets or not, I think it still would be a good idea to have a reference in the report. So we, in case we go with brackets, to try to explain what those brackets mean. Why are there brackets in the documents? So I still think, Madam Chair, if you go forward with the decision to bracket the documents, it would be good to have a sort of a reference in the report that clarifies why the brackets are there, which would basically be the concerns Africa is raising. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway. I think that was a constructive proposal. Colleagues, we just have 2 minutes left, but I will give the floor to Mexico and Argentina, and please be brief. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. We would like to support what has just been said by Norway and Colombia. There needs to be a reference that would guide us and indicate what happened during these discussions. We've made big efforts, and we all understand we're in a region where we're also facing challenges, but we have to take account of all of the efforts and all of the revisions that we've made to these documents and the discussions that we've had. And as public officials of our countries, we have to report back on the use of resources to these international bodies where we've made contributions, and all of this costs money. So we really want to have that reference in there, and we very much support what has been said by Norway. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Quite simply, we would like to reiterate what we've said on other occasions. We think that if a regional group as a totality is manifesting its difficulties, this of course has to be heard. We find that it's a cause for concern to continue as if this had not happened. And at the same time, we do understand the proposal to indicate this in a report, where we think it would also be necessary to include a reference to all the moments in each of the agenda items where different delegations experienced connectivity difficulties, including in some of the contact groups. We lost the contact for agenda item 7. There were 2 South American countries that weren't able to participate in that contact group, and we were constantly bumped out of the platform. Thank you very much.
Gina. Okay, I will then suggest if we put the CRP3 in brackets as suggested by Uganda on behalf of African group, and then at the same time we'll invite the African group to explain why in the report, so it's clear to everybody it's not because opposing, it's just to make a reference. I hope that could be acceptable to all. Portugal, on behalf of EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Besides the statement we have on the shut window, I would like to read a small brief statement. We think we made good progress over the past 6 weeks and had many constructive discussions. We recognize the difficult conditions under which we all work and the particular difficult conditions for developing countries. Still, we had valuable contributions and good exchanges of views from all parties. For the further process, we count on all parties to build on the progress made, and therefore, we hope we can also continue the work on the remaining CRPs today and tomorrow. While we regret the bracketing of entire CRPs, we are willing to continue working on the text as we understand the position of the African group is not to be meant as to stop the work, but to reflect their concerns related to internet connection issues, among others. Furthermore, we think it is important to give input on these items to the co-chairs of the open-ended working group. The European Union and its member states continue to be fully committed to do our work and use all time available to make as much progress as possible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, European Union. Well, the Secretariat is telling me that I have no more time, so I'm very sorry about that. I just say, can I try to conclude, Secretariat? Do I have time for that? Okay, thank you so much. I would then suggest to put a bracket around the whole CRP. I invite the Africans and all other who want to reflect on this to have their reflect all statements in the report as requested. Could that then be acceptable? I see no objection. So CRP 3 with that bracket and with all the references in the report are approved. Thank you very much. We now have to adjourn. We meet again tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Montreal time. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.